Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Walk to Wealth podcast. If you're tuning in on YouTube or any of the podcast directories, we just ask you one teeny tiny little favor. If you find any value in this episode or have found value in the episodes prior, we just ask that you recommend us to a friend. We are trying to impact as many lives as we can on their walks to wealth as possible. So if you just recommend us to one friend, that's all we ask. It would mean the world to us. So without further ado, I have a very special guest. Cyndy, for anyone that may not know you, tell us your elevator pitch. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Cyndy Porter, and I'm the owner of Success Through Style. And I am passionate about helping people feel great in their own skin and to show up for success.
That's amazing, Cindy. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about you in our pre-show call. But tell us a little bit about your walk to wealth. Where did this story all take place? How did this story begin?
Well, I have had a long story. But yeah, my walk to wealth, I would say, is actually I had a very successful career in the corporate world, and you might consider that my walk to wealth. But I really feel like when I was able to quit the corporate world and start my own business, I jumped on that opportunity. And I have not looked back. It's been maybe 15 years now. I've been out on my own. I started as a portrait photographer. I just love the craft of photography. But I quickly realized that more than the craft, I loved helping women in particular feel beautiful. And that kind of transitioned into helping them feel beautiful, not only in pictures, but in life. So from that, I got certified as an image consultant. I personally struggled with the feeling good about how I looked most of my life. And although I had a successful career, I feel like it could have been so much better if I had left my house every day feeling good about myself. And so that's why I really love to help other people, men and women, understand who they are. Who are you authentically? How to show up in the world, to show that to other people, and how to dress in a way that impacts that. So I have grown a small business all about that. And that I feel wealthier in the fact that I am impacting lives
Hmm.
more than monetary impact that I might have achieved in my corporate life.
Well, no, that's an amazing story. And you said, how much more successful you would have become if you walked out every day just appreciating who you are and loving how you looked and how you felt. And I feel like one of the things that we're taught to do as kids that kind of screws us over is in adult world as to ask for permission, right? Because we're taught to always ask. We must raise our hand before we speak. We must wait for someone gives us the permission. And the thing that sucks about permission that it grants the power to the person that is giving you that permission. Once you asking for permission gives you, you lose your power, right? That power to be yourself, the power to pursue your own dreams, the power to enjoy yourself, the power to be happy. And you give all that away. And you kind of mentioned it's a good point to start about. So tell us a little bit about what kind of helped you made that shift to really start appreciating how you look so that you could show up every day as your best self, as your truest self. How did you get over that hump?
Well, can I just first say that I love what you said about having your own power and not giving it away to others, because I think that's at the heart of what we all need to do. And I think that plays into my story is you can spend a lot of time trying to act a certain way, dress a certain way, to have other people affirm who you are. And I think when you decide, so for me, there was this light bulb moment when I realized that my past as a, successful, I was a VP of marketing at America Online and understood brand marketing. I was trained in that in college and really understood the principles of marketing and made my career around that. And then after I left that world, I became a portrait photographer and got certified as a portrait photographer and won awards and was pretty successful doing that. And one day I realized that if I married those two things, if I married art and the principles of art together with how businesses brand themselves, that we can all do that for ourselves. So instead of trying to please other people or dress in a way that I thought conformed, or look at the mirror and not feel like I was measuring up, which were all the things that I had done all of my life. The minute I realized that, you know what, I can create my own brand. Who am I? How do I want the world to see me? And then to use art principles in a way to dress, not only to express who I am, but also to showcase my best features and maybe camouflage those things I don't like so much.
Hmm.
That was really the powerful moment for me. And so I knew that I was onto something because I came from these other two worlds that I wanted to put together. And then I did go and get trained officially as an image consultant. And I put all that together. And through that process, I transformed myself and how I thought about myself and how I dressed and how I showed up and believing in myself. And I knew that I really wanted to do that for other people. So yeah, that's how it all began for
Yeah,
me.
and while we're still on this topic, let's keep on running with it. I feel like one of the things that we hear often too, at least from on a woman's side of the thing, is, "Oh, does this dress make me look fat?" And for like the men, it's kind of it's like, does the shirt make my chest poke out a little bit? Does it wrap around my biceps a little bit? Does it pop out a little bit? And you get this all the time, and people say it jokingly most of the time, but as there's from all jokes stems a little bit of truth, right? No matter how lighthearted a joke may be, there's so much. Any good joke, at least, always stems from a little bit of truth, right? That's why it's such a fine line to walk when you're trying to be a comedian, right? And so, but a lot of these things are rooted in people not liking how they look, and there's like, co- you can listen to any pop song or hip hop song. It's like, and most rappers, like Drake said at one time, and you got to hit them angles, right? You got to hit them angles because the angles make you look best, as high as the things we're insecure about. It makes certain features pop out more than they would have if someone were to see you. And people tend to suck in their stomach before they take a photo or pop their chest out, and it's all authentic. And we're kind of plagued with that in this society, especially now that social media, everything's online. You can't tell the difference. Everyone's now promoting, like the Kylie Jenner lip challenge, just all these unhealthy things that are mainstream now, of people altering their image instead of being grateful for how they look and embracing how they look. It's just alter, alter, alter. And it's a multi-billion-dollar business. So you mean you can't blame the media companies for pushing it out there. They're making money off of it, but a lot of people are falling victim to these things. So with that being said, let's kind of jump right into this topic of how can people start to, I guess we could start with, how can they start embracing or finding their style? Or like, where does this process that you typically work when you start working with clients begin? Because there's kind of a lot to uncover, with from insecurities to your dressing style to your fashion to how you carry yourself, like you're walking with your chin up thing. There's so much to cover. So where do you normally start when you're kind of trying to tackle these problems?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that it's very complex. And there's the whole thing that I talk about, which is people do judge us based on how we look. And we need to be aware of the fact that people judge us. And so I talk to people about that, mostly for those people who don't care enough, right? Who have decided that they're overweight and therefore they're not going to try, or I'm much older than you are. So people in my generation feel like they don't have the body they once had anymore. And so they're just not going to try. But on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who try too hard and they're constantly going under the knife or investing in Botox or changing their look on Instagram that's not really correct because it's a filter, right? Or putting the right pose on to try to show themselves in a certain way. So there's a fine line between these two things of knowing that people are going to judge us based on how we look and kind of going overboard with it. But I think it all comes back to authenticity and knowing yourself and really being clear on who you are and the image you want to project and staying true to that. So most of my clients aren't people who are fashionistas who follow the trends. They're really people who are out doing important things in the world and want to make sure that how they look is helping them and not getting in their way. So that's one piece. And the other piece is women in particular have a tendency to only focus on what they are not. So the Dove Foundation, I don't know if you're familiar with them, the company
Yeah.
that does the soap and the
Yeah, I have all their soaps. Well, not the
yeah.
I use the one. I use just one, and that's been my soap for like the past like 2 years.
Yeah. So they also have a nonprofit foundation where they do a lot of work on self-esteem in women and girls. They're really pretty incredible. And they
Mhm.
did a survey a few years ago where they interviewed 10,000 women in 10 different countries to determine whether women find themselves beautiful. And what do you think the
They
results
didn't.
were?
I think I'd say if I had to put a number on it, I would say at least 80 to 85% of women said that they didn't consider themselves beautiful.
Yeah, you're in the right ballpark. It was 4% of all women, and this is worldwide, 10 different countries, believe they're beautiful. That means 96% do not.
Sheesh. I was off.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
You are at least in the somewhere in the ballpark. But yeah, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because if you look around, like, and I guess I believe everybody's beautiful, that we all have our own beauty. I mean, some are more classically beautiful than others. I'm not blowing smoke in that regard,
Yeah.
but everybody has beautiful features and everybody has something to express. And I think especially in the world we live in today, I think so you asked me where I start. I start with the process of helping people really understand who they are, like really understanding what your strengths are, what your values are, how you want the world to see you. And I think that's more important than classical beauty. So some people are really interested in making a statement in how they look.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with classic beauty. It has to do with I want to make a statement, especially when you are somebody who's outside the mainstream and you want to take a stance in who you are as a person and you want to be respected for who you are as a person. So a lot of people, that's where it starts and ends. It's like I want to express my individuality. I want to express who I am, but everybody has quote unquote a brand. And so I help people go through a series of exercises, questions, some tests. And at the end, if you can narrow down, say, 5 adjectives that you want to use when you look in the mirror that describe who you are. So whether that is that you're creative and out of the box thinker, that you're edgy, that you're bold, that you're dramatic, or that you're strong or feminine or lovely, whatever those words are for you, then your whole look and everything you do should be in alignment with those. So it's the same way, like if you think of your favorite companies, like if you think of a company that you love, tell me a company that you love.
Let's say Nike. First one to come to
Nike.
mind.
Okay. So why do you like Nike? What is it about them?
Honestly, I really started liking Nike mainly just for as I played sports, so like specifically football. So all their cleats and athletic wear, and that's what made me really start liking him. For the most part, although it's a little expensive sometimes, it's not like luxury brand, like designer brand expensive, but they make good quality stuff for the most part and was made for athletes. I am, at least was an athlete. I still play sports all the time, like, but I feel like it's geared towards people like me who are active and fit and move around a lot.
Yeah. So so Nike's brand, right, is for I mean, they work with professional athletes, but their primary business is people like you who are active, see themselves as athletes, want a high quality brand that they can still afford, that they can perform well in, and all those things, right? So if Nike were to sit down and say, this is what we stand for, like what does the Nike swoosh stand for? It stands for those things. And so everything they do, if they were to come out with a product that was cheap and fell apart and didn't work, or was more about looking glamorous than being practical on the field or whatever, that would be considered off brand. So it's the same thing with all of us. If you think about Apple computer compared to Microsoft, right? They're both computers. Some people love Apple because they're more innovative and it's more user friendly and it's got all these things about it, but it's not the least expensive, right? So if all of a sudden they ended up with some very practical, inexpensive product, people would be like, "What is this about?" That's off brand for them. So it's the same thing for us. We need to understand who we are, what is our brand, and then everything that we wear from our hair to our eyewear to our glasses, right? To our clothes, everything from all aspects of our life should represent that brand. And quite frankly, you could take it to the next step of what you say, how you act, how you behave, what you post on social media. All of those things should be in alignment with that. And I think if you're doing that, like that's the first step in showing up authentically for everything that you do. And what will happen is people who have values just like yours will start to pay attention to you, and you will inadvertently attract like-minded people into your life just by doing that set of things.
So
Does
let me
that
ask you, yeah, no, that's a great answer. But a question arose kind of while you were talking, where you said who we are and who we want to portray to the world. There tends to usually be a gap between that, between who we are, especially in people that suffer with depression and things like that, and are, or like the avatar that they are living in, they don't like, right? And they want to be someone else, right? They want to be another avatar, right? And so, especially, and another thing too, it's like when you're starting off, usually times are hard. So you're not the successful entrepreneur, you're not the successful photographer, you're not the successful, real estate agent or podcast or whatever it may be. So in that beginning stages, I think, how do we, because I don't believe you should fake until you make it, because that isn't authentic, as we're kind of talking right now. But like, how does one, when they're starting off, if who they are isn't who they actually want to be or want to portray, how do you get over that hump?
Well, so I do think that faking it until you become it is a strategy that helps a lot of people. So when I talk to people about creating a personal brand, I have them look at kind of like three bubbles and where these three bubbles intersect. And one is who you are authentically. One is how you want the world to see you. And the third one, which is the hardest to get your arms around, is how the world actually sees you. But if you can find the connection between these three things, you've mastered a brand. And sometimes we're in situations in our life where you mentioned we're feeling down, we're not liking ourselves, we're not where we want to be in our lives. And so who we are authentically isn't how we want the world to see us. Or maybe we're transitioning from one career to another career. Or maybe we want to be a leader and we're not yet seen as a leader, or we're moving into an artistic field and we hadn't done that before. And so the world doesn't see us as the person we're trying to become. And so I think that it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to show up like the person I want to be and slowly be on this path and inch towards becoming that person. So that is what. So you said you don't really like the fake it till you make it thing.
Yeah,
So what don't you like about it?
the thing I don't like about the fake it till you make it is it comes from being disingenuine. It comes from a place of scarce and lack.
Right.
And that's why I don't like it, because the walk to wealth, kind of what I mentioned way back in the pre-show, is like about abundance, right? In all your areas of life. And when you fake it till you're making it, if you come from or operating with an abundance mindset, you don't have to fake anything.
Right.
You just have to show up as you. The results may not show up right then and there, but as you kind of were saying, as you stay more on brand, as you stay true to who you really are, and everything you do kind of aligns with who you are, the people who also enjoy the things that you like and resonate with you are going to start liking what you do and wanting to work with you, kind of. So I kind of say where fake it till you make it is, you're pretty much lying. You're putting on a charade almost
Sure.
to the world. Whereas like, if I still like to say, believe it so you can achieve it, right? Believe it's possible. So it's essentially the same kind of thing, just operating from a lack versus operating from abundance, I think. But so that's kind of why I don't like the term fake it till you make it.
No, I love it. I love the way you reframe it. And I do think that I'm a big fan of vulnerability and not pretending that you're somebody that you're not. But I do think there are times where we're we're being our own worst enemy and trying to show up a little bit for the person we want to become will allow us to step into you used earlier giving away your power. Like it's all about owning your own power. And so if you say like this is just a random example, but I ran a marathon and I
Hmm.
always wanted to run a marathon. And when I first started, I could barely run a mile. And so I could have said to myself, I'm a terrible athlete. I'm never going to get there. I suck, whatever. But instead I start visualizing in my mind the person who is finishing the going over the finish line as the athlete that can actually do that. So I think it's all in how you look at the fake it till you make it. It's like, how do you visualize in your own mind's eye the person you want to become, and then take baby steps towards actually becoming that person.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think the part I like about the fake it till you make it is more so when you try to talk to other people about it. Because someone, as you're saying, like, "Hey, Cindy, you run marathons?" "Yeah, I run marathons all the time. Yeah, I'm a marathon runner." "Yeah, that's." Yeah, and that's what kind of when that's what I think about fake it till you make it, which is why I don't like the idea. It's like,
Got
"Yeah,
it.
I'm a marathon runner." And in all reality, this might be your first marathon. I like to believe it's your achievement because it's like, "Yeah, I'm a marathon runner. I might not be the best, but I'm working towards it. I'm getting better." I just,
Exactly.
my time last time was a minute better than my run 3 months ago. Like, acknowledging and as you said, showing that vulnerability. Yeah, I kinda suck at this, but I'm getting better, right?
Right.
That's being realistic, but then also adopting the identity of who you want to be because you want to be a successful marathon runner. And right, but
Yeah.
then you also have to practice a little bit of realism because you can't just have illogical. Like if you never ran a marathon before, like good luck, you might pass out the first time if you try to run under
Exactly.
in time. So it's definitely a lot of different factors at play. As long as you're just not like making it seem as if you're someone you're not type of thing, which is
Exactly.
what I think about with the fake it till you make it thing. I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit too from earlier, back when you were saying, so you need to find out who you are and then find out how you want the world to view you and then how the world actually views you. Right. I want to start the first circle as a little bit who you are before we start moving on to the other circles. So how do we answer that question of who are we? What's the proper way to answer that question?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I ask that question to people, I'll be speaking somewhere and I'll say, "Who feels like they have a personal brand?" And a lot of people will raise their hand, and I'll say, "Well, what's your brand?" It's like, "Well, I'm a financial advisor, or I'm a real estate agent, or I'm a mom," right? And it's the same thing. Like those are things you do. So if you really are defining a brand, if you change careers tomorrow, it's still your brand, right? And it's still your brand, whether you're with your kids or your partner or your profession or, your friends, right? It is who you are inside. And so asking yourself questions like, one of the things I have people do is they write a personal mission statement. So the same way a company would have a mission statement about why they're in business. If
Mm,
you could write a mission statement about why you're living this life, like what's really important to you, or you've heard people say like they've written their eulogy, like what do you
mhm,
want people to say about you when you die? Like it's not going to be that you made a lot of money. It's not going to be that you had a certain career. It's really going to be in the heart of who you are. And so I have a series of things that I walk people through to help them get to adjectives that really talk to them. I also do a really cool art exercise that people can do
mhm,
on their own. So basically I ask them to go find like 5 pieces of art that they love for no other reason that they love it. It can't be, "Oh, I love dogs. And so here's a picture of a dog," or "I went to Fiji on vacation. And so here's a picture of that." Just like scrolling through art, architecture, scenery, landscapes, and just finding 5 different things that you love and then describing either to a friend or just writing it down to yourself. If you were to describe it, how would you describe it? So what are the words that come out? Is it that it's lovely and peaceful and zen-like and relaxing? Or is it like it's bold and dramatic and fascinating and interesting? And so if you do this enough, if you combine like, okay, tell me 5 words that you want people to say about you. So you might say, "Well, I'm smart and interesting and creative and funny." And then you do this other exercise where it's like, "Tell me what adjectives, you use when you describe this beautiful beach in Hawaii that you've picked as compared to this like dramatic painting." Like whatever it is that you find and you put all those words together, you start to say like at the heart, people will keep repeating over and over again the word dramatic or the word lovely. And then all of a sudden they'll be like, "Oh, I had no idea that that is so meaningful to me. And that I really, that's what I want. I want to be seen as somebody who's provocative and I ask challenging questions, or that I'm heartfelt, or that I'm lovely, or that I'm creative, or whatever it is. I'm positive, and so it's really simple. When you get down to it, these 5 words are very simple words. But the question is, how do you show up that way every day? So if it's authentic
Mhm.
or genuine, like how are you being that way every day? And then what I do is I translate that to clothing. So what does it look like to be genuine? Because that's not a lot of cosmetic surgery. That's not an overabundance of makeup. That's not showy, But if it's also genuine together with glamorous, now how do we put those two things together? And then if you're going to add in smart or creative or kind. And so what does that package look like if you are making something abstract? Like what would that look like if you were making that? And then how do you apply that to yourself? And that's where the art piece comes in.
No, that's
Kind of
amazing advice. Yeah. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit too. So now that we kind of got a grasp of finding out who we are and how we can describe ourselves, let's hop on to the next one as to how we want the world to see us, right? Because especially you made the switch from the corporate world to entrepreneurship, especially when you're starting off. I know for me, my personal experience, when I told my grandparents that I left college to get into real estate, they were like extremely against it. And it took them a while for them to put some respect onto what I was doing and know that it's actually something that I'm doing and not just me like messing around. Right. And
yeah,
same way with a lot of entrepreneurs, when you start up your own business, it's how's that little side gig going? And it's like little small hint. You got to pay attention
right.
to the words, right? Or how's your little gig going? And they describe it in ways that kind of like pushes it down a little bit and
Hmm.
discredits it without you really realizing it because it's in casual conversation.
Hmm.
And for a lot of people, it'll go over their heads. But if you really pay attention to the words people use to describe your business when you're first starting it out, a lot of it is discrediting and disempowering. So how do we kind of get other people to see us and what we're doing and respect it and know that we're something serious and not just a waste of time or BSing or whatever it may be? Because that's usually a really hard thing to make a switch. Because once you build one perspective, shifting that in the minds of everybody, it tends to take a while.
It does. And I think it's a little bit different because what I'm talking about is not anything you're doing. It's really who you are in your heart. So whether you're a student or whether you're a real estate agent, whether you're a podcaster, you're still whoever you are on the inside. And people who love you and care about you and you want to have in your life all know that about you if you're exhibiting it, right? When it comes to making a change, I think in what we do and how we show up that like people aren't taking us seriously. Like I know that like when I started my own business, it's like, oh, so now you're a photographer. Oh, now you're an image consultant. Like they didn't and and it's really none of their business. Like how successful I am, how much money I'm making. It's the formula that I put on it. So I was always clear on when I started this part of my career, like I wanted to make enough money, but it was really more about impacting lives. And that's my metric. And as long as I stay true to as long as I know, like I have my mission for my life and my mission for my business. And as long as I stay true, it really shouldn't matter what other people think. But what I care about other people thinking is if they know that I'm the kind of person that I want to be. So if being authentic is really important to me and I ever show up in a way that feels inauthentic to people, that's when I feel like something's gone wrong. Because a lot of times what we have to realize is when people have questions about us or little disparaging comments about what we're doing, it might have to do with them and their fears. Like your grandparents might be fearful that if you don't stay in college and you do this other thing, that you're not going to be as successful as they want you to be. But so
Hmm.
their fears coming in, and you have to just like put up your own like boundaries and say, like, I totally believe in what I'm doing. I really appreciate any fears or feedback or whatever you have, but I'm going to stay true to what's in my heart. And if it doesn't work, like, I'm not saying yours won't. Like
Yeah,
for
no,
me,
no
if
worries.
it doesn't work, then you start something else. And that's part of, like allowing yourself to fail is also a really big part. I think you've talked about in the walk to wealth. Like you have to allow yourself to fail as well.
Yeah, definitely. Failing fast and failing often is one of the key factors to
Yep.
determining whether or not you'll last and make it anywhere in this entrepreneurial world. And
Exactly.
just being able to pivot when you do is pretty much just as important because we'll fail often. There's kind of different method thoughts where it's like schools of thought where it's like, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I'm me. I'll always be true to myself, and like I could care less what anyone thinks. But then there's also the people who are like, oh my goodness, Sally is gonna be there. What if she thinks this of me? And just like are enslaved by the thoughts of other people that may not even be thinking anything at all about them. But like,
Right.
how do we kind of walk that line so we're not just completely like, I don't care about anything. I'm just gonna do whatever I want. And also, oh my goodness, I can't go because what if they think this, or I can't do this because what if they think this or X,
Right.
Y, Z. So how do we kind of walk that line?
Well, I think again, it's a spectrum, and there's like self-loathing on the end, and being and fearful of what other people think, and then on the other end, it's like kind of not caring what other people think and being alone.
Yeah.
Ha- Jeff Bezos says that a personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so it is true that people are going to judge us and people are going to have assumptions about us. And I think we should care about that, that in order to be successful, we want people to see us the way we want, with the way we want them to see us, and that we can be proactive. So I call it having an intentional image. So I do think we should care. Like we want people to experience us a certain way, but not to the point that it debilitates us, that it makes us insecure or keeps us up at night. And so it all comes back to that being intentional of how do you want them to see you? And then how do you behave in a way that's consistent with that? How do you look in a way that's consistent with that? If one of your words is kind or positive, then you're really conscious about thinking about other people and thinking about the positive alternative to a problem instead of being negative about it. So there's little things that you can do all the time, but I think it can get overwrought if we are too worried about it, or too self-conceited if we care too little about it.
Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you a little earlier. I don't really think there's like a good or a bad brand. I think there's better or worse for whatever you're trying to do. But like one of the words that you mentioned as an example to describe earlier is provocative. And with words like that can really be either loved or hated. Like it's usually on the extremes when you're someone who's provocative and use words as such that are similar. How do you tread those waters to make sure that you still have a strong brand? And
Well, somebody whose brand I really admire is Serena Williams. And she was provocative throughout her whole career. And she would show up on the tennis court to make a statement. And she was not treated well especially in some of the earlier years of her career. And she stood her ground. She didn't give in. She fought for herself. And she showed up also in the way she dressed to say, I'm here to make a statement. And yes, she's a superhero,
mm,
but there's a lot of people whose brands I really admire are people Ellen DeGeneres is another one who, like, she got blacklisted from TV years and years ago because she came out as gay before people were coming out as gay, and she lost her career, and it was only because of her voice. Like some digital animator, like, heard her voice and needed a voice like hers in Finding Nemo, and he didn't know who she was, which is how she made her comeback in that voice. But I think people who like know what they stand for and are not afraid to be that person, no matter what the consequences are, are people who have really strong brands. And both of those women are examples of people who might not have made it, who might have not have been the valued kind of superstars that they are today in their own right, if they hadn't made a stand for what they believed in. So I think as long as you're doing it in a way that's not harmful to somebody else, but think about through history, like the people we admire the most are people who weren't afraid to take a stand. Those were just two that came to the top of my
mm-mm.
mind. There's many like them.
Yeah. But those are two very household names. I think most people are familiar, even if they don't watch tennis, which I don't, but I still know Serena Williams. And Ellen, I don't watch TV, and Ellen, I can picture an image off the top of my head. And so I kind of wanted to ask you because we're living in a day and age, and especially which my people, like people my age, it's ridiculously annoying, but we have this thing called cancel culture. And if you decide to say anything that goes against whatever the vast majority of people think, and not to get into any specifics or anything, but just in general, right? It's like you're instantly canceled and you're pretty much cast aside, astray from, and exiled almost like virtually from everything. So it's like, how do you, try to, and at least in this day and age with the digital world, try to and find your way and find your brand and be who you truly are and get over the fear when there's so many other factors out there trying to kind of, in a way, suppress people and not allow them to be themselves authentically.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's easy for me to say, well, just be true to yourself and don't worry about the consequences, when sometimes, like, for your livelihood and for your existence and for your
Hmm.
self-esteem, you need to show up in a certain way. I think the best thing that I've found in my life is I am more likely to be happy and strong if I'm being true to myself. And if I'm too worried about what other people think, then I could find it suffocating. I've worked in companies where the culture of the company was totally at odds for who I am as a person, what I believed in, what my values are. And when I finally left those companies and found another environment where people thought like I did, not that we should only be around people who think like we do, but if you can't say what is really on your mind, if you are in a situation where, if you, like you said earlier, if we ask for permission, we're giving away our power. If you're at a table, virtual or real table, where you can't say what you really think and know that it's going to be handled well and respected and listened to, then you're at the wrong table. And so I think if people are canceling you, if people are ghosting you, they're just the wrong people. And thankfully, there's a whole lot of people and a lot of different circles in this world. And we got to find find the right ones where we can
Hmm.
be authentic and we don't have to put on a face that's not who we really are in order to fit into that subculture.
Yeah, there's a guy that I was speaking to in my speaker school. Was it? I don't know if it was a speaker school or a podcast, but no, it was a podcast. There we go. It was a lady I had actually on my podcast, and she mentioned that if your circle isn't filled with people who are supporting you and there for you, and not to say that you guys all think exactly the same, but are at least helping you or trying to better you and things like that, you're in a cage, not a circle. And so I kind of wanted to
I
ask
like,
you. Yeah, it rolls off the tongue nicely, and it was a
yeah.
good quote. But I wanted to ask you, so how important was it for you? You kind of mentioned leaving a different to go to a different company to find people that were more aligned with how you thought and went about things. How important was finding your, like, we call it our tribe here at KW?
Mhm.
How important was finding your tribe, and how important is it to have a balance of people who are aligned with what you do and people who aren't aligned? Because I also always think this, like, regardless of what one person or the other may believe, it's like we're all, for the most part, essentially just trying to better ourselves and the world we live in. We just all have different ways to go on about it, and people tend to divide themselves, whatever. But it's like, I feel like you could learn a lot from someone who you disagree with, a lot more actually from someone that you disagree with than someone who you actually agree with. Some people just tend not to be open minded, which is why it's hard to get into intellectual conversations every now and then. But how important was finding your tribe for you, and how important is it to keep some people as well that aren't actually aligned with what you do, so that you could still gain different perspectives on other sides to see the kind of the other side of the coin?
Well, I think your question is the answer, that you need both. But I think the tribe is the most important, because the tribe is what will fuel you and which will give you the safety in order to be yourself and ask questions. They talk about psychological safety. I think if you have people who think differently than you do, who have different opinions and values than you do, as long as the psychological safety of the network that you're in is there, then I think that's really productive. When those people who think differently than you do or have different values than you do are not listening, are not kind, are not open-minded, then it does you no good. I mean, it's just stressful. It's like going into warfare. And I've been in those kinds of situations as well. And I'm always reminded when people say, just be more curious. So I think having a tribe of people who you feel safe with, who think like you, but then when you run into those people who don't, if both of you on both sides can just try to be more curious, like, I wonder why he or she thinks that. Maybe I can ask questions instead of just going into like needing to be right and proving my point. Like, you can't prove your point. Both people standing there trying to prove your point. Nobody's going to win. Somebody has to take a back seat and say, well, tell me more. And so come to the table with curiosity, but you have to have psychological safety in order for all of it to work.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of mentioned that because it takes a lot of maturity to be able to saying like God gave you two ears and one mouth for a reason. To kind of sit
Exactly.
there and hold your tongue, especially on something that you're passionate about, and especially when emotions are in play. There's like someone that like, have you ever seen two therapists or two psychologists argue with each other? All that psychology and therapy stuff goes right out the window, right? Yeah,
Right.
because we're humans at the end of the day, right? And
Exactly.
so I kind of want to ask a little bit as well about, so we kind of have our tribe now. We have a couple people that are on the other side. I wouldn't say other side, but think differently but are open-minded enough to engage in these conversations. And so now from what all we kind of been able to learn with who we are, how the world views us, and how we want the world to view us, how can we kind of start formulating an actual brand so that we can then market ourselves, whether it's our podcast or it's our X or it's our Y, or how could we showcase our brand and the things that we do? Because it's not like, hey, I just stick my sign in the yard and sell houses. No, it's
Right.
I'm someone that is fun to work with and I'm super energetic and I'm lively and I'm funny. Like, do we start kind of mixing the brand with the business to make it all
Right.
in kind of like in unison?
Well, you've probably heard the adage, stories sell and facts tell. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
So I think the more you can come to the table with stories that illustrate what you're trying to communicate, that's a great way to have a brand, right? Like, so if you decide that your brand is that you're energetic and that you're fun, but really asking yourself what makes you different from everybody else, like why you? So, and I think that's a big part of it. So whenever I talk to people about branding from an entrepreneur standpoint, the the question is, who is your ideal client and what problem do you solve for that person? And why would they pick you to be the person to solve it? And so if in all of your communication, you're talking about, well, who is your, like in your business, in your real estate business, who's your ideal client? So I think you're passionate and driven to help young people. And so if you can find, I know young people who are killing it, who are going and buying Airbnbs and who are
Hmm.
buying their own homes and creating wealth because of it. So if you can find the stories of people who are saving their money and putting it
Hmm.
into their first home, even if it's a starter home, that you're being true to your mission
Hmm.
if that's what you're doing. And that doesn't mean, and I think people get sometimes confused by this, that when you say, well, my ideal client, so in my business, my ideal client are professional women, but I also
Yeah.
work with young women, I work with teenagers, I work with men, I work with all kinds of people. But my business and my marketing is all driven to the woman that I feel like I want to help, the woman who I was when I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin, right? You want to help young people to flourish, but that doesn't mean that if somebody is like, that is so cool what he's doing for young people, but I need a luxury home, you can't go sell that
Hmm.
luxury home. So I
Exactly.
think if you stay true to who you are, which is helping young people, and think about ways to educate them, put on seminars for them, to tell
Hmm.
stories about young people who are taking risks and it's turning into success for them. That's the way you show up. And that everything you're doing, like your podcast is already doing it, but if you also talk about how everything on social media is about celebrating the young people who are putting themselves out there and who
Hmm.
are and are flourishing, then that's your brand, and to
Yeah.
stay true to it.
Yeah, and kind of like one thing that's happened, like the shift kind of happened like kind of last month, where I stopped spending as much time in real estate and doing like active real estate stuff. I'm still doing it, obviously. I'm working with a couple clients now, but like it's more so because the podcast translates so directly to what I actually want to do in life.
Hmm.
I've been putting a lot more time and energy into it because there's more fulfillment in the podcast. And the podcast is going to eventually open doors to me speaking. I already got interviewed on a couple podcasts. I got my sixth interview lined up from the time of this recording next week. So it's like, it's starting to open doors for me to speak on other shows, right? Which is
Right.
then going to open doors to me to speak on schools and stages and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right?
Exactly.
And so it's like, I've been actually shifting a lot more time because, as I said, this just the podcast just lives out my mission so clearly. I'm just like, this is where, without me trying to, I keep finding my focus being shifted back onto this for whatever reason. And as it's like, sometimes you have to just sit back and listen to what you feel and run with it because there's usually a reason. And there was a saying where like procrastination, usually not procrastinating because you're scared or whatever. There's usually something behind that. You have to go like unpeel the onion. You may be procrastinating because the thing that you want to do and want to be successful in, whether that's real estate, whether that's you when you were in your corporate job, it's like after a certain point in time, you'll realize it's like, I actually don't want to do this. Although it
Right.
may pay the bills, it may keep the lights on. I want to do X, I want to do Y, I want to do Z. And just taking the time to sit back, gain clarity as to who you are, as we're saying, and who you're meant to help in things. And that kind of, you'll keep finding your focus being shifted to one thing. And that's just kind of led me here to the point where it's like I may be devoted too much time into this right now, but it's all for a good cause because this is something that, as I said, I didn't expect to be where I'm at right now with the podcast, and it's opening more doors. It's like, well, now it's like I can keep on doing this, keep providing a bunch of value, and maybe also make a living from it. It's like, well, if that happened, it's like I hit pretty much check all the boxes, right? I'm
Exactly.
impacting lives, living out my mission, and helping keep my bank account, happy as well. So it's like, what more can I ask for?
Exactly. Exactly. You have one life and you should live it doing things that you love and following those opportunities that come along that are in alignment with that. While at the same time, if you need to pay the bills, you do what you have to do in order to make that happen. But hopefully over time it shifts to doing
Mm,
more and more of what you love and less of the things that you have to do.
yeah, it comes with consistency as well. Tongue twister,
Yep.
sorry, because like it's one of those things where it's like, for like the first like 6 or 7 months, I was averaging like maybe like 10 downloads an episode, which is like, I was like, oh my goodness, it's barely no one. And then I started thinking about it, 10, and then it went to 15, and then it went to 20. Then I started realizing, well, 20 people a week, that's about a small classroom of people.
Right.
And so it's like, now I'm at a point where I'm getting about like within the first like 7 days, like close to 30, 35. And it's like, okay, that's like a larger, like, that's like a little, a good sized college classroom right there.
Right.
And due time, that'll start growing. Then once I get to like 100 people, and it's like, well, that's like, and I start imagining like, how many of these people would be in front of me if I were to just take my listeners and pack them into a room? And then I realized I'm actually making an impact, although it may not seem like anything. It's playing out and staying consistent, not missing an episode, and just keep on getting after it, keep on bringing guests. And one of my friends that's just started his podcast, he was like, John, why do you do a pre-show call? Why do you have all these forms and stuff like that? Don't you just want guests to hop on? It's like, no, because I care about the integrity of the show. It's worth so much
Yeah.
more because that quality people are going to see like, oh, shoot, every time John has a guest, it's a great conversation. They provide value. They provide X, Y, Z, whatever. And like, oh, he's producing so much content. He's putting a lot of work in it, and it shows kind of. And that kind of plays into that, the third circle that you talked about earlier is how the world actually views me. And they view that I show up and I'm consistent and
Right.
I put a lot of effort into it.
You do. You've done it. I mean, with me, I can say it's been very professional and very well done. And I think you're showing up for success is what you're doing. And
Thank
so,
you.
yeah, when you show up for success, it'll follow you.
Yeah, so kind of went over a bunch of different topics, who you are, how we want the world to view us, how the world actually views us. Then we talked a little bit about your mission statement and wrapping it the personal brand altogether, what kind of tips that you might have not have mentioned throughout the show that you kind of wanted to mention, would you also give to the idea of creating that strong personal brand and living out that brand in your everyday life? Is there anything that you kind of wanted to touch on?
I think we focused on the idea of building a personal brand. I think one thing you can do in addition to the things we talked about, and I think the underlying thing is to really do the soul searching to know who you are at the core. And it's not what you do. It's not what you're doing for a living. It's not whether you're a parent or not a parent or whatever. It's what do you like? What really gets you up in the morning, and how do you want the world to experience you, and how do you want to be remembered? And if you are struggling with it, maybe think of other people that you emulate. Like, who do you really admire and why? So I mentioned the artwork. So the artwork is one thing to do. If that doesn't work for you, I've had people like, hey, pretend you're a color. Now describe to me what the color, like, okay, say you pick the color blue. Now describe who you are as the color blue. Or if you were a car, what car would you be? Or just start asking yourself a lot of very open-ended questions to get to the heart of who you are. Journal on it if that helps. Find other people who you feel like, if I could just snap my fingers and be in that person's skin, that's what I would want. And all of those things help what you want to do. Then the next thing that we didn't really spend a lot of time talking about is the practical part of actually becoming that, and how you look and what you say and how you show up. And that's just, it's a journey that's never ending. So
Yeah.
yeah, just I think that if you could journal, I'm a big believer in journaling when especially if you're going through a change, to just like say, like, who do I want to be today? Like, how do I want people to see me today? What one, two, or three things am I doing to show up in a way that will attract people into my life that have the same values and that respect the person I'm trying to become?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, after listening to this episode, people can have a general idea of what their personal brand is. But then my question would be, how do you articulate that brand? Because it's we all tend to have things up here, but actually getting it out, it tends to be another story, and usually we can't describe it as well. Or someone asks us like, "Hey, why do you do what you do?" And we get our words kind of get jumbled up a little bit. So how do we then start to articulate our brand in if someone were to ask us, so that we can, no matter who we ask, no matter what we do, we could take it from out of our heads and into the real world.
Yeah, one thing that I would do is ask people, other people that you trust, how they see you. So that if you get in your head, like, this is the way I want to show up. And then you go to maybe 20, 30, 40 people who in different aspects of your life, and just say, I'm working on my brand and I'd really like to know, like, what words come to mind when you think about me, so that then you understand, where am I today compared to where I want to be? And maybe everybody says, most of them, but you want to be seen as a sophisticated leader or something. And nobody is saying that. So you know that people see you younger than than you want to. You want people to see you more as a grown up, or vice versa, right? So
Yeah.
then that's the one thing I need to do when I show up, is I need to really show up in this way that makes a difference. I think if you're not great with words, you can always hire people who are good with words to help you articulate it. And I also think that there's a disconnect when we look different than how we say we want to be. So I run into this all the time with clients who want to be seen as serious, but they dress the same way they did when they were in college, or they wear like bohemian styles, but they want to be seen as sophisticated. Like, look in the mirror and really ask yourself, like, do I look the part of these adjectives that I've come up with for myself? And be
Yeah.
honest with yourself.
Cindy, you've been dropping a lot of interesting and valuable points this entire episode. Where can anyone kind of get a hold of you? Where can we find you at if anyone wanted to go deeper into this?
Yeah, thanks for asking. You could go to my website, which is successthroughstyle.com. Through is spelled THRU. So successthroughstyle.com is the best way to find me. I also recently did a TED Talk, and
Hmm.
I would love for people to check that out. So I'm sure you can provide the link
I'll be in the show notes.
to those two. Yeah.
And would you mind telling our guests something special that you have working on? I heard that you may have a book on the way. Would you like to
I
announce that as
do.
well?
I do. I'm trying to not procrastinate, as you were talking about earlier, and force myself to write 750 to 1,000 words a day. I'm really excited about. I do have a book out there that at this point I'm not as excited about anymore, and I really want people to understand that there's two things that I really care about, and that is that you have the confidence to stand up for yourself and become everything that you want to become, and that on the other hand, that you are dressing and showing up for success and that you know how to do that. So I have a new book that's coming out hopefully in the fall of 2023 that not only going to theoretically talk about this idea of having an intentional image, but actually walking you through the steps in doing that.
Amazing. And so now it's time for my favorite segment of the podcast, the final four questions, which is how I wrap up every single show. Cindy, what is the most impactful lesson that you learned in life?
Oh, there's so many. But I think that the most impactful is to be vulnerable and authentic. That when I realized that I could stop pretending that I was something that I wasn't, that the person that I was, the difficult childhood that I had, some of the very difficult situations that I become, the more I opened up and actually let people in to see who I really was, my whole world changed.
What is the most admirable trait that you'd find in a person? You can find in a person.
We talked earlier about curiosity, and that is my big one these days. I think too many people need to prove that they're right and are stuck in their own opinions. And that, especially in today's world, maybe we can always say that, but being curious about other people and the way the world works and what they're thinking is very admirable to me.
Yeah, definitely. My girlfriend actually gave me a book called Think Again. And the whole idea is we tend to be so stuck in our ways and become so good at thinking. And once we find a way, we stuck at rethinking when it's time to pivot. And so I'm reading that book currently. So I recommend it. Definitely it goes along the lines of what you're talking about, curiosity. If you had to change someone's life with one book, what would you recommend?
Oh, what book would I recommend?
Yeah.
Oh, so I guess if I go back to my life, the book that's been the most impactful for me is a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Mhm.
And I would recommend that book. It's about, do you know the book?
I've heard about it. I heard tons of good things about it. I just haven't had the time to read it yet.
Yeah. I'm actually was thinking about rereading it. I've read it more than once and it's pretty incredible. It's about a Polish man a man in a Polish concentration camp during the Holocaust and how he found meaning when there was no meaning to be found. And I'm a strong believer in that we not to get into religion, but that the one thing that we have control over is making meaning in our everyday life and finding that one thing that gets us up in the morning is the thing that really gives us the strength to carry on. And that's what the book's about.
Amazing. And so the last final question, what is the legacy that you're trying to leave behind?
I think that the biggest legacy that I want to leave behind, there's two things. One is I have one child. He's 18. He's about to go off to college. And I didn't have the support as a youngster that I wish I had. And I think he's gotten that support. And I just want him to be able to go into the world and do amazing things because he knows he was loved. And I think for my work, the legacy I want to leave is that everybody should and can feel great about who they are and show up in the world to make a difference.
Amazing. And to Cindy, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm super, grateful to have had the opportunity to have this conversation with you and kind of go in depth about style and meaning and who you are and get into a couple topics that you normally don't talk about on a day to day. So thanks again for hopping
Thank
on the
you.
show.
You're great at what you do. It was such a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you, John.